This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
John Harbaugh last night was fired by the Baltimore Ravens, which has led to a frenzy in the head coaching market as people position themselves to try to get John Harbaugh to take their job opening, as we even figure out if John Harbaugh even wants to take a job opening. And look, John Harbaugh has an excellent resume, an excellent reputation. He's very qualified for every single head coaching job in the NFL, and he is absolutely, without a doubt, going to have an easy time finding another job outside of Baltimore. It's more if he wants to take the job than if the job is going to be available for him. He has a great reputation, all of that, and that's why people are rushing to try to give him a job, essentially. I have a bit of a unique perspective on this because outside of this channel where I talk about the Browns, I also have my AFC North Talk channel, which I've done since 2019, where I interact and talk about the rest of the AFC North, right? I talk about the Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Cincinnati Bengals. This requires me to keep a close eye on these teams and pretty much follow these teams since 2019, and also allows me to, know a lot of people in the Ravens content space, know a lot of people who are in Ravens coverage and in Ravens world, all of that stuff. I have had the unique opportunity to have a unique perspective on knowing how Raven fans feel about John Harbaugh, especially over the last few years. And there is a bit of a disconnect here, right? There is the image of John Harbaugh that people think of when they hear that John Harbaugh is available to be hired. And then there is the reality behind John. And not to say that the reality behind John is such a terrible reality that he should never get a head coaching job, but there is a difference there, right? What people want John Harbaugh to be, in my opinion, at least amongst Browns fans, I think Browns fans feel like hiring John Harbaugh would make the Browns what the Ravens have been the last 20 years, like that his win-loss record comes to Cleveland and all of what the Ravens accomplish in his Super Bowl ring comes to Cleveland. Like, it feels like people think that the reputation of the Ravens comes with hiring John Harbaugh. You get the same phenomenon when Browns fans talk about potentially hiring Mike Tomlin if he were to become available. And that's more of an idealized version of John Harbaugh. It's not the reality. Nobody's idealized version is the reality. The reality of John Harbaugh and the reality of his relationship with the Baltimore Ravens and why it ultimately fell apart is a bit different than what's being presented, though, by Browns fans who want to hire John Harbaugh. And again, I'm not saying that the Browns should not consider it. I'm not saying if John Harbaugh showed up in Berea and begged to take the job, yeah, you hire John Harbaugh. Sure, give it a chance. It's not the worst thing you could do at all. But I am saying, before we go all gung-ho about the ideal of bringing in John Harbaugh, I do think we need to not talk about the ideal of John Harbaugh and talk about the reality of John Harbaugh, which is a little different. And that starts with the question of, why did he get fired from Baltimore? And make no mistake about it, he got fired from Baltimore. If you read Steve Bisciotti's, his press release on it, he says that he fired John Harbaugh, right? There were some reports that tried to make it sound like a mutual parting of ways, but that's not what it was. Steve Bisciotti had an interview with John Harbaugh at the end of the season, and after that interview, he decided he needs to fire John Harbaugh. why did that happen, right? If we are to understand that the Ravens are not a bad organization, that Ravens ownership does not have a track record of making knee-jerk reactionary decisions or emotional decisions, why is it that they made the choice to fire Jim Harbaugh? I think that's a very important thing to unpack before you dive headfirst into Jim Harbaugh. And there are a lot of things that come with it. What I'm hearing is it comes down to this idea of at some point they were going to have to decide between going all in and continuing with Lamar Jackson or continuing with Harbaugh. That Lamar's frustrations have grown to a point with Harbaugh that a decision was necessary between the two. Now, some people might hear that and be like, oh, he just lost a power struggle with Lamar Jackson. That's all there needs to be known. He's still a great coach. Let's go hire him right away. And again, I get the eagerness there. John Harbaugh, and a coach of his reputation and of his accomplishment, doesn't come around often. But again, let's just dig a little deeper here. Why did John Harbaugh get to that point with Lamar Jackson? Right? You got to ask that question. If it got to the point to where it was Lamar or Harbaugh, and the Ravens chose Lamar, why did it even get to that point? That's not a natural thing to arise, right? Why did it get to be that point? And I think that's where you start to dig up some things with Harbaugh that kind of undercut the ideal of John Harbaugh. Why is it that Raven fans have been begging for Harbaugh to be fired? Are they all just spoiled and idiots, or do they have a legitimate reason behind this? Why is it that it's not just Raven fans that want Harbaugh fired? Apparently, it was Steve Bisciotti that wanted Harbaugh fired, and he's ultimately the one who did it. Lamar Jackson, from a lot of people's read on this, wanted Harbaugh gone. Why is it that he wanted it gone? There's a lot of people who cover the Ravens who suggest that this is the route that the Ravens should go. This is not an unpopular decision in Baltimore to fire John Harbaugh. It's actually a popular decision. There are Raven fans who are legitimately happy that they have done this. And we can dismiss them and say that they're spoiled and they're idiots because they're rival fans, but they're fans just like us. And Browns fans had their reasons for wanting to move on with Kevin Stefanski. And it didn't feel great when the national media kind of dismissed those reasons and acted like we were just all idiots for being happy about the Browns moving on with Kevin Stefanski. But they're fans just like us, right? They have their reasons, and those reasons probably come from watching the team over time and having frustrations. And look, some of the people I know are upset aren't really the ones that are eager to talk about firing a coach. So why is that the case? And I think it is because there is dissonance between the ideal of Harbaugh and the Harbaugh that everybody talks about and the reality of what comes with John Harbaugh. See, when I hear Browns fans want to bring in John Harbaugh and they talk about the ideal of John Harbaugh, they say stuff that doesn't really fly with the reality, right? A lot of what I'm hearing is he's going to bring culture and he's going to bring accountability, right? That's the main two things I'm hearing. When I talk to Raven fans and when I talk to people who cover the Ravens, a lot of their frustration with Harbaugh centers around a lack of preparedness, a lack of preparedness for tight situations, clutch situations, and really just a lack of the culture to win in those moments, and a lack of accountability that they feel like is there, right? One thing that is true with John, that was also true with Kevin, ironically enough, is John Harbaugh trusts his guys. He's going to give his guys long leashes, right? This was a problem with Greg Roman at the end of his run in Baltimore. This was a problem with Zach Orr at the end of John Harbaugh's run in Baltimore. He will give his hires a long rope before he even considers moving on. And a lot of Raven fans felt like John Harbaugh moves way too slow to make decisions that need to be made, and that has cost the team in their championship window. A lot of Raven fans, and I think this is justified, feel like John Harbaugh was too passive in championship windows with the overall philosophy with the team, right? Being aggressive, going out and getting guys, making the big move to put you over the top. It just wasn't an aggressive enough philosophy to meet the moment. That's at times John Harbaugh defaults to passiveness. There also was a general sense that John Harbaugh is not the most accountable person, or doesn't hold people the most accountable, right? There was his constant coddling of Zach Orr as he ran a pretty subpar defense out there in Baltimore, despite that defense being very expensive. There was the whole Daniel Falele thing. If you know a Ravens fan, if you have talked to a Ravens fan, if you have a diehard Raven fan in your life, please ask them about Daniel Falele. I promise you they're going to go on a rant. They don't like Daniel Falele at all. Just go Google Daniel Falele and look at the things that Raven fans say about Daniel Falele. He's kind of like their Jed Wills, but like, you know, they don't like the guy at all. Right? If you want the Browns to hire Harbaugh because you think he's going to do the classic coach accountability stuff, you know, bench guys when they make mistakes, things like that, that's not how Harbaugh rolls, right? Harbaugh has more of a laissez-faire kind of philosophy on leadership. He's not going to bear down and scream at you and yell at you and be that kind of a coach. Similar to Kevin, he's going to kind of let you find your own way before you get your guidance, right? That approach, that laissez-faire approach, I thought was a pretty successful approach when it came to Lamar Jackson, but with other players and in certain windows, it's not the greatest approach. Now, again, I'm not saying this to dissuade you from wanting Jim Harbaugh. I'm not saying that hiring Jim Harbaugh to take the Cleveland job, if he even wants to do that, which is, I think, a long shot, is a bad idea. But I do think if you are going to hire John Harbaugh, if you're going to hire John Harbaugh, you should really be aware of what he brings to the table, both positively and negatively. And I think a lot of people aren't really looking at what John Harbaugh is done and why it is that Ravens fans and the Ravens have fired John Harbaugh. And instead, they're just looking at what they hope John Harbaugh could make their team. And for Browns fans, I think they're hoping that John Harbaugh could make us the Ravens. But John Harbaugh didn't make the Ravens the Ravens. John Harbaugh was a part of a larger process that created the success that the Ravens had. But if John Harbaugh does not luck into Lamar Jackson, he probably gets fired in 2018, right? Talking about John Harbaugh as just a head coaching candidate for the Cleveland Browns, I think obviously with his resume, with his reputation, he's a strong candidate, probably the strongest candidate on paper that you can find. I think there are a lot of things that John is really good at that will help him in the Cleveland job if he were to take it, right? John's ability to be very collaborative. I think that's John's number one way of working. He's a super collaborative guy. That's how he worked as a special teams coach. That's how he worked for 18 years in Baltimore as a head coach. He was collaborative with Ozzie Newsome. That's what Ozzie loved about him. And he was collaborative with Eric DeCosta. That's what Eric DeCosta loved about him. He is a very collaborative guy. He's going to take input from a lot of places. He's going to let his coordinators do their own thing, and he's going to try to support them as best as possible. And I think that's a good thing when you look at how the Browns operate and how Andrew Berry operates. He's also a collaborative guy. I think there is some synchronicity in the approach that John Harbaugh has with the approach that Andrew Berry has. Now, the thing with John Harbaugh, I mentioned this before, you're locked into his coordinator hires for 3-4 years. And sometimes those hires are good. Sometimes they're not. It doesn't matter if they're good or not, though. you're locked into them for a few years. He's going to stick with his coaches. He's going to stick with his guys. There are going to be some things about John Harbaugh that feel really familiar to Kevin Stefanski, right? The whole Kevin doesn't want to fire Bubba thing. That's absolutely something that will happen with John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh would not fire a coach that everybody thinks needs to be fired. This has happened multiple times over the last 5 years with the Baltimore Ravens. You know, the whole, hey, Kevin should bench this player, but Kevin's given this guy too long of a rope. That's absolutely something that will happen with John Harbaugh. This has happened a lot with John Harbaugh. He has given guys long leashes, has been a little bit slow to make moves off of them because that's how John likes to operate. There are legitimate reasons why Raven fans aren't a fan of his game management. Like, as much as it's easy to look at his record and look at what he's done, and I think that is a very attractive thing about John Harbaugh's resume, you do also have to consider, like, he didn't get to this point with Baltimore for no reason. Again, it's not even a mutual parting of ways. He straight up got fired yesterday by Steve Bisciotti. Like, Steve Bisciotti said, I fired him. That does not happen unless there is a lot of underlying frustration with the job that Harbaugh is doing. And I think you got to talk about why that's been the case and not just fall into, oh, well, Raven fans are spoiled or something like that. And acknowledge that there's some legitimate downsides to Harbaugh that you got to take the good and the bad and ask yourself, do all of those things make up a good fit for this job? I think it can work, but I don't think it can work if you're looking at John Harbaugh as a savior. We're going to talk about this more, especially that savior thing, in just a second. But first, I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code WORSTTAKE. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. Do I think John Harbaugh in Cleveland could work? Yes, I think it could work. You know, I don't think it's guaranteed to work, but I think it could work if the right things were in place, if the right coordinator hires were made, and most importantly, if the Browns were able to luck into a way to get a quarterback. I think it could work. I don't know what John Harbaugh's history is without a quarterback because there's not much history of him without a quarterback, right? He had he had Joe Flacco to start. Joe Flacco kind of helped him out through the early part of his career. And then once Joe Flacco was done, it was time to start with Lamar Jackson. So he does have an impressive record. He does have all of these things that come with him, but Lamar Jackson does not come with him. A franchise quarterback is not what you're hiring when you hire John Harbaugh. So you would be, for the first time in his career, putting him in a position where he's starting from scratch without a quarterback. What does John Harbaugh look like in that situation? The record without Lamar Jackson is not very encouraging in Baltimore. I believe it's under 500 under John Harbaugh without Lamar Jackson. So you have to ask yourself, is what he's able to do going to be sustainable when we don't have a real path for a quarterback? Is the stuff that he brings to the table stuff that we're going to be okay with dealing with over a longer period of time when that quarterback is not there to create the floor and the wins necessary? That's another question there. Does John Harbaugh even want to take a job that doesn't have a clear path to a quarterback? And what does John Harbaugh think about the quarterbacks in the draft? Or does a team with a quarterback decide to let go of their coach to go get John Harbaugh? It's a lot of things that could happen. This goes to one of the tropes that the Browns have fallen into, or at least Browns fans have fallen into over the years when it comes to a head coaching hire that worries me at times, which is oftentimes Browns fans with a head coaching hire aren't looking for a new head coach. They're looking for a savior. They're looking for somebody that they can believe will be a legitimate savior to the franchise in the way that like a great quarterback would be a savior to a franchise. If you're expecting John Harbaugh to come in and just be John Harbaugh, work well, collaborate with people, trust his guys, create some stability, all of that, then John Harbaugh could meet your expectations in Cleveland. If you're hoping that John Harbaugh becomes some kind of savior in Cleveland without a quarterback, I think you're going to be disappointed with what happens. If you think that John Harbaugh is going to become some kind of like staunch disciplinarian in Cleveland, you're going to be disappointed. That's not how John Harbaugh operates. He's a lot more laissez-faire, right? He's more, if you're hoping that John Harbaugh is going to do anything more or do anything other than be John Harbaugh, you're setting yourself up for failure. If John Harbaugh takes a job where the expectation is for him to be anything other than John Harbaugh, you're setting yourself up for failure. John Harbaugh is a good coach, but if you hire him to be a savior, you're going to be very disappointed, right? And I think we do this too often in Cleveland media, where we build somebody else's head coach up to be some kind of savior, and that's not what a head coach is. Head coaches aren't saviors. They're head coaches. So again, I'm not saying that the Browns shouldn't do it, but I hope if the Browns do it, they do it with the expectation that they're just hiring John Harbaugh, not with the expectation that they're hiring a messiah or a savior. If they go in with that expectation, this will be another Cleveland Browns failure. If they go in with the expectation of, hey, we just like what John brings to the table, I think there's something that can work there. But if we're hiring him to be a savior, we're going to be disappointed because he was not a savior for the Baltimore Ravens. Ultimately, he could not provide to the Baltimore Ravens what they felt like was necessary to get over the hump. And they're letting go of him because they think they can find somebody who can help them get over the hump better than John Harbaugh can. And the Ravens aren't letting go of John Harbaugh for no good reason. Raven fans aren't upset. Raven fans aren't happy about John Harbaugh being let go for no reason at all. There are reasons why these things happen, and these reasons have explanations that make them very reasonable. It doesn't mean that John Harbaugh is toxic. It doesn't mean that you should never touch John Harbaugh or don't hire John Harbaugh. Don't take that as what I'm saying. But if you're looking at John Harbaugh as anything other than a human who has some flaws, some things he brings to the table, some things he doesn't, and you aren't evaluating John Harbaugh for that, then you're setting yourself up to be in a place of disappointment. And that's kind of what I've seen with most of the talk about John. A lot of people are describing him with traits that aren't really accurate to where John Harbaugh sits. And one thing I know for a fact John Harbaugh would not see himself as, and I think a lot of people see John Harbaugh as something that I know for a fact John Harbaugh would refuse to be seen as, which is a savior. You think John Harbaugh getting hired here is going to save the Browns and make us the Ravens and give us all the respect that the Ravens had over the last 20 years. That's not going to happen. You hire John Harbaugh, you get John Harbaugh, you don't get any of that other stuff that you're talking about. You just get John Harbaugh. And that can work out for you. But you got to have your expectations centered. That's all I got to say. You have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.